and now you're growing an agency. I don't know how many people you have working at your agency.
We're 9 now.
9.
Yeah. Including myself and Joe.
Right. And that's like a totally different world, like running your own agency. It's like you probably go to your office or probably work at home, but you don't have to worry about, is somebody hacking into my phone system, somebody taking out the trash in the office, is the security set? And you're like, oh, I have to pay the phone bill and I have to go ahead and take out the trash and all these little things. I'm a small business owner, so I understand it. I remember like going to Google once, and like the Googler was like, yeah, they do our laundry for us, they give us massages and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, somebody just hacked into my PBX and made phone calls to China. I got to deal with that. He's like, oh, you got to deal with all that stuff. Like they're just like kind of clueless in that area. But what does it take to like kind of like grow your SEO agency while like running a whole business and doing everything from, taking out the garbage to everything else?
There's nothing good about COVID, but one of the benefits of COVID for us was that we actually closed our office, and we haven't really been back. So if we need to get together, which I think has only been once or twice since all this craziness happened, we'll just get a co-working space. So it's been a nice kind of hybrid. So thankfully, like things like trash and other things aren't as time consuming for us. But there are other things like insurance policies that either your clients require or just for your own business. There are payroll and payroll taxes and IRS and all that other stuff that you kind of think about when you're starting a business, but when you actually get into it, it's a lot more confusing than maybe you would have thought. I think for us, one of our first initiatives was to try to get some mentors who have been through this process, and they were either building their current business or they had built it to a point where they had sold it and were trying to figure out what their next thing was. So we got a lot of different perspectives, a lot of really helpful kind of direction and tips on being able to manage things while you're still small. I think one of the best tips that we got was as we started to hire more and more employees, we had to figure out what do we do for healthcare and 401ks and all this stuff. Matt Greitzer, who's another former Razorfish guy, incredibly helpful in kind of steering us as we were first getting started. But one of his tips was to look at a company called TriNet, which kind of aggregates a lot of small businesses together. Maybe you know about them. But,
they call me all the time.
Yeah, so they aggregate a bunch of small businesses together and kind of pool all the employees together. So then they go to healthcare companies and say, hey, we have this many employees. So you kind of get the rates of a much larger business, even though you might be smaller. So that's one example of ways that we've been able to kind of streamline that process and make it a little less of a headache.
But when you're ready to do an exit, there might be some complications with that, I believe, from what I understand. I didn't go that route with the TriNet or those types of aggregators, because I think there is some tax consequences to that in terms of the structure of the company, I believe. I'm not exactly fully sure. But in any event, you're right. These are the things you got to think about. You got to think about all of this stuff. And not only that, like employees have personal problems at home. They become your problems. Like they can't come to work for whatever reason, or they need extra money because some type of, God forbid, medical issue or something like that. It's on you. Make you feel like they're part of your family and you got to take care of them. So you're kind of juggling all that. And you're trying to grow your SEO agency, bring in clients, make sure the clients are happy, that they pay their bills, that they promise to pay you, that they don't always pay you. So it's a whole different world, I guess. What are some of the recommendations you maybe have for people who are starting out? The mentorship is obviously very important.
Yeah, mentorship is huge. I think the other piece is, how do you attract talent as a small company? For us, we immediately identified that the benefits piece was one area that we could invest in to kind of help us stand out. So we cover healthcare 100%. We have a very lenient vacation, obviously work from home policy. One of our employees lived in Brazil for many years, moved back to the U.S., and in the winters, just the cold weather was just not into it. And asked if he could go back to Brazil during the winter. Sure, yeah. It's only 1 hour time difference, actually less than our employees in California. So I think being flexible with those sorts of things, being willing to invest in benefits is another area that we can compete. And then we've kind of for our interview process, we kind of take a unique approach too. We kind of break it down into a couple of different sections, but there's really only a handful of questions about, paid search or about SEO. What we're really trying to understand is, based on your experience or based on how an employee would approach a situation where they have to, find an answer themselves, for example. Are they a good fit for a small company? Are they a good fit for working independently, where you're not going to have your boss across the hallway to go and ask questions at all times? So, that's been a process that's been, I think, really beneficial for us. We haven't had a ton of turnover. A lot of the folks that we've hired very early on are still with us. So I think that speaks to kind of a little bit of the interview process, but also the culture that we're trying to build, even though we're not in the same office every day.
Right. It's, if you want to borrow that Kahoot quiz for your interviewing process, feel free.
It's actually a great idea.
But I totally agree. I mean, one of our rules when my company, we don't do SEO or we do development, was basically you have to be here in person, and then COVID hit. But still, it's still super important for the culture for them to fit right in the company, even if they're working remotely.
Yep.
And the only way to do that as a small business is, do you click with that person? Do you feel they understand? Do they care about the customers? Do they care about growing themselves? And I think that applies to any company, really. But it's interesting that you have to worry about, because the turnover could hurt a lot more. I shouldn't say that, because there are some big companies that have like one or two, they don't really invest in SEO. When one person leaves, the whole company kind of gets in a bad position. But turnover stinks, and especially during COVID, it's been hard for especially large companies. I think you hear like they call it the max resignation or exodus and stuff like that, and it's affecting. You hear about it mostly with these big firms, these massive firms. People leaving left and right. I mean, you left your company during COVID, right?
Yeah, I did.
But again, I mean, this type of stuff happens, and it's hard for a small business to manage it, hard for a large business to manage that. And like treating your employees as best as you can, listening to them, giving them that promotion, even for a small company, probably is not even worth it, because in my company, it's like we don't have titles. Everybody takes out the trash. Everybody is, I take out the trash, that type of stuff. But it's hard. I think the way you go about it for, growing your agency and making sure employees stick, that's probably the most important thing, making sure your employees are happy, because I always say happy employees make for happy customers and so forth. So.
Definitely. And, for an agency, having that consistent point of contact is incredibly important. I mean, we have a lot of potential clients that come to us and say, we've just had 4 or 5 different account managers in the last 6 months. Like, we have to, we're looking for someone who is going to have some stability, is going to have the same people on the phone, regularly, because that's really how you're going to get to know the business, and be able to provide much more meaningful recommendations and insights just in general conversation. So I think that's a huge value add that we bring, in terms of that kind of solid core group of employees that we work with. I think the other thing that kind of set us up well is that we, even before COVID, kind of had a hybrid work model. So we would only go into the office 2 or 3 days a week, and we'd work from home the other days. So, when we got rid of the office and didn't have that expense, we gave, I don't know if you call it a bonus or what have you, but like a work from home office stipend essentially. And, get a better chair, get a better monitor.
Right.
So we did our best to kind of set our employees up for success, knowing that this was probably going to be a little bit longer term, and it's kind of turned into something that, for us, kind of works, because we're already sort of set up to do it in terms of work from home.
Right.
So I think that transition for us, at least, has been a little bit easier as well.
Yeah, for sure. We weren't mostly in the office, but everybody was beforehand able and easily, like, if they needed to work home for the kids' purposes or whatever, they were able to just quickly work from home. So for us, it was one day I'm like, you know what, nobody's coming back to the office. It was probably like a month ago, 2 years ago today or something like that. I think it was something around that. And then people were like, okay, so they got on the VPN, they were able to work fully. The only difference was they didn't really have their corner or their work area in their house.
Right.
You saw people working from like the kitchen, dining room, stuff like that. And over time, I don't know if people are going to come back. I still have my lease here because I was just renewed my lease like 6 months the year before, which stinks. But I guarantee the building's going to be like, oh, we can let you out of your lease now. The second I get out of the lease, all the employees are going to want to come back.
Right.
And find a new lease. Cool. All right, let's move on to the next topic because we've got to make sure we get you guys out of here.